there were about 15 French prisoners in the village. Each one of those prisoners went in a different direction because they worked for different farms, one here, one there. And every time I went to a job in a field and I bumped into one of those French guys coming back from his field, we just stopped and shot the breeze.
I first met Leon when I moved to San Francisco in January of 1965. I went into a lovely little apartment which I'd rented through a friend. But I walked into the apartment and opened the kitchen windows in the back, saw the garden, and suddenly smelled orange marmalade and wondered where that wonderful scent was coming from. It seemed to be coming from the sky. And then I heard what I was sure was Japanese language. That man was studying Japanese. I couldn't believe that, and of course it was Leon.
And my father moved around as a child. He was born in Belgium, moved to Italy, then back to Belgium, then was in Germany, then came to the United States. And I think all of those things kind of informed his ability to adapt to new situations.
But he was always the quiet one, and you could talk. And thanks to Leon, I got interested almost in everything, because he was interested in everything. And
so my dad was a great dad, and that's how I know him, just kind of a mellow dad. He was an older dad because he was 50 when I was born, but he was just very, very into being a dad. He just loved us and was very generous. And
when I come to you with my eyes wide open, I know you will tell me the truth. It'll all be fine. We'll remember these times, live up to the dreams of our youth. Together we see through shared experience, a way for the good life to be. Close my eyes, imagine my past. The early days, they move so fast. A life is shared and forever will be. And the story is here to see. Story is here to see.
So I have one memory when I was 10, about 10, I'm guessing I was about 10, and I was a kid, and my brother too, and I think my brother and I both got roller skates, and so we were like, just kind of struggling getting into our roller skates, and all of a sudden my dad decided he should get roller skates too, and it surprised us. We were like, oh, because at that time my dad was probably like 60-ish, I don't know. And he went out and got these like big size roller skates that I remember thinking were so huge, so he could roller skate with us.
When I was a kid, I loved to fish, and my father hated fishing. My grandfather was a great fisherman. My uncle was a great fisherman. My dad did not inherit the love of fishing that some of the rest of us in the family did, but he always wanted to, indulge me in all the stuff that I enjoyed doing. And so he took me out on a boat when I think we were up in Seattle, and we went out fishing in Puget Sound. And the water was a little choppy that day, and the reason I think my dad doesn't like to fish is because he gets seasick, and he was so sick the whole time, and I was having a great time. I got a little green, but I didn't care because I was enjoying my day so much. But my dad was throwing up the whole time over the side, and never complained. Just was just thankful to be back on land when we got home. But he was willing to do that for me.
Must be 3 or 4 years ago. And we sat outside. We always like to sit out in the sun. So we sat at a table, and it was a big table, and a very nice-looking man, maybe in his 50s, very well-dressed, very elegant, asked if he could sit with us. And we began to talk to him. And he was from Turkey. And Leon talked about his drive from Stuttgart to Tehran, and Leon remembered every little town in Turkey they'd been through. The man was just amazed. He said, nobody but Turks know those little towns. How can you remember it? So he's, typical of his memory, and which is extraordinary. I mean, recitations he's made from all sorts of the Divine Comedy, or, amazing memory.
But Leon is a nice guy. I would say from all my brothers, he has always been the nicest with me. The other ones, from time to time, a little bit this and that. No, they didn't hurt me, but, brothers and sisters, they argue. So that's the story of Leon. He was a very kind person. He still is.
It was a little bit of a madhouse, all the boys, when we were around, because the spread is every time 2 years difference. So there are some that are older and some that are quite younger, like 12, 14 years younger. We were 5 brothers, and then there was Irene.
We were always together, all of us.
Beautiful childhood, because when I was 3 and we lived in Danzig, you know where Danzig is? It's attached to Poland. I mean, now it's Poland. It didn't used to be. When we were there, it was a free city. And we spoke German. And then we moved back to Belgium for 6 months, and we started speaking French. And then we moved to Italy. And then all of a sudden, everybody was speaking Italian. Playing at the beach, we remember vaguely the house that we had. We lived in a village just on the outskirts of the city.
We were lucky to live in different countries. He was very peaceful, Leon. Always been all his life. That's why he's still alive. No, because he's calm.
And everybody else would be fighting, and he would be like, trying to smooth things out. And I think he carried that into his life too. And maybe he was just born that way. He just had a really clear idea of what was fair and what was right. And with my brother and I, he was always really fair.
I think he found his niche as the second oldest as being somewhat of the peacemaker and the one who took care of the younger ones. I had a couple of uncles who were much more boisterous than he was and strong-willed, but he always took care of his youngest siblings and his only sister. And to this day, she still says how much she loves him because he did such a good job taking care of her and protecting her when she was little from, all the other boys in the family.
After the Depression, they had moved from Sardinia back to Belgium, and it was a hard time. There weren't jobs. They had a very good business in Sardinia. His father was head of a cork factory, doing very well, but Mussolini took charge. That was in the era of Mussolini. That was in the early 30s. And Mussolini just took everything just nationalized everything. It just belonged to the state. So they had to move back to Belgium, and of course, coming from the sun to kind of a cold, windy country, and Flemish, because they all had to speak Flemish, must have been very hard. And it was a large family. There wasn't any time really for extras, and yet Leon took the time at the end of the day to go into Irene's room, and he would bring her books, and he'd teach her things that she wouldn't have an ability, she didn't have access to. And she's never forgotten that. I mean, that was really part of her formation. And it was not available. It was available only through Leon.
First of all, during the war, if there is nothing around you, nothing, you talk. So you get interested in books. We could read. That the Germans didn't tell you, no, you cannot read this or that. Everybody was reading. And you were reading books that were, comment est-ce qu'on dit ça? Des classiques. And being older than me, it could influence me in my studies, but not directly, not opening a book and explaining to me, but in general, in the conversation.
In Belgium before the war, a maid came in and she cooked for us. She came at 1 and left at 6 or 7 at night, so spent the afternoon. During the years of the German occupation, we lived near the stockyards, and before the cows were slaughtered, killed, we went there an hour or two before this happened and went and milked the cows and got the milk back home. So that was food,
During the war, when he was in forced labor in Germany, and I think that was probably a very dangerous and difficult thing to navigate. And I think he used his ability to make people like him essentially feel comfortable, and allowed him to navigate that situation and keep him out of trouble and out of harm's way during the war.
He was, a young man, and the Nazis were occupying Belgium, and I guess they allowed schools to stay open, so he was still going to high school for a few years during the war, and then one day they were like, okay, all of the young men between the ages of this and that, 17 and 20 years like that, go to these locations and get on the bus because you're going to go work. Yeah, you're going to go work for us. So he got on the bus not knowing where he was going, and it ended up that they drove him to a really remote farming village.
I don't even remember having been on the train taking me there. But I remember what happened the next day. I'm in a camp right outside of Stuttgart, and they just, all Italian people in the camp, all of them. The Italian front had just collapsed, and they had taken the soldiers and a lot of residents, women, also, that God knows where they got them. I was so excited to see Italians, I started talking with them, and they immediately turned against me because they thought, this guy looks too much like a German. His Italian is too good, he must be a spy. So I had let one of those French guys come on my field and set up the trap. And then when they caught that hare, it weighed about maybe 15 pounds. Beautiful, big animal. So the guy said, I cannot cook it in our compound, but you have to cook it at your house. So he prepared it, he cut it up and all that, and I cooked it. But then I could not eat it without giving it to my employer. You know, I didn't want to give it to him. I want a French guy to have it. So we had a huge bucket, and we put this thing, and we crossed the village with this wonderful smell coming out of that bucket because it cooked it with wine. And I did not have any of it to eat because I was not locked up with the others. They were locked up.
We were lucky that during the war, he went to Germany. My eldest brother was taken prisoner by the Germans and was in concentration camp. The third one went in hiding at the end, almost at the end of the war in 1943.
My brother was in a concentration camp. So this here was almost like being on vacation somewhere compared to what he went through.
It was a very hard time. But once, after the war, when you see that the whole family came back alive, then that's like a miracle.
And then all of a sudden, we decided to come to America. I came here with George, and so we applied for a visa. I could speak English enough to get by. And I spent 5 or 6 days in New York before we took the bus to San Francisco, the Greyhound bus. And that took us a couple of days, you know. Stopped at Grand Canyon, and then went to Long Beach, where we had an aunt. One of my mother's sisters lived in Long Beach. And we stopped to say hello. And then from Long Beach to San Francisco, we took another bus. And then we met with my uncle Boris, who had been here since 1905.
I mean, so after he came to the United States, he was in North Beach, which was like Beatnik Central at that time. I think he had an apartment he had several apartments. He talks about living right next to bimbos.
So one day I was at the Vesuvio Cafe, and I knew the owner, and he had a girlfriend, Bonnie. And I bumped into Bonnie one day, and she's all out of breath, and she said, "Oh my God, you know, I just made a terrible mistake. I made a deposit on an apartment, and now I decided I don't like it, and I don't want to lose my deposit." So, "Oh my God, you know, where's your apartment?" And she says, "Well, here it's on Telegraph Hill." And I said, "Well, how much is your deposit?" So my deposit is $45. I said, "Look, Bonnie, don't sweat it, you know. Here is $45, and give me the address, and I'll go and have a look at it. I'll take a chance on it." I went there and I talked to the woman who was on the first floor, and this apartment was on the second floor. And so I took it, and I lived in that place for the next 18 years.
The first time I came to the United States was in 1956, the first time. And Leon lived already there. And we were in a car down below, and he said, "Where do you live?" I asked him. "There." He said, "I'm not going in the car." I was afraid to go on that steep road. Oh, so steep.
And my mom and dad were both from Ghent, but they didn't know each other, and my dad's 18 years older than my mom, and so my mom came out in the 60s with some dream of like freedom and being a flower child, and she had felt constrained in Belgium and constrained by her family, and so she had to get a round-trip ticket to show her parents, I'm just going to San Francisco to visit and I'm coming back, but she never intended to use the return ticket. So she flew out to San Francisco, and her parents were concerned that she was traveling alone, and so they said, "Oh, the brother of your sister's school friend is living there, so we'll just have him pick you up at the airport." So that was my dad. And he picked her up, and he was about to leave on a trip to Santa Barbara, and he was like, "You want to come? And you'll have your own room." And she was like, "Okay," and so they went down there, and I think the first night there was an earthquake, so.
And eventually, Madeleine and the two children were born in that apartment. Well, they were born in the hospital, but I mean, we saw San Francisco being built from the kitchen window. You looked out, it was like a porch. Looked out, and you saw the Bank of America building going up. You saw the pyramid, That was from 1954 to 1972. But it was very small. It was 3 rooms. You could hardly move. The main bedroom had a double bed in it. And then it had so much space on either side of the bed, between walls.
I must say, both our parents extremely cultivated, knew a lot of things, knew a lot.
My grandfather and probably those before him all had a bit of a bohemian streak.
They both spoke several languages. They traveled a lot. They were interested in everything. Les deux, Papa and Maman. We were lucky.
He was raised with an interest in the arts and intellectual thought. He loves opera. He loves classical music. He calls it his classical music station. There's not a lot. There's like one. So he calls it the good music station. So the only good music station. Yeah.
He was always learning, still learning, even though he's up there in age now. He's still learning. I remember as a kid, he was already at that point. He had me quite late, so he was already in his 50s, mid-50s when I was maybe 10 years old, and he was still taking classes in Japanese, learning Japanese, and getting awards for doing speeches in front of his class and stuff. And that was had a profound effect on me to realize that, you never stop being a student in life, and he was never afraid to pick up and learn new things and be curious.
And he, I think he went to, after high school, he took some university classes in business and stuff like that, but it wasn't really like, because his life was kind of it was in transition, moving to the United States in his, as a young adult, and so, and starting to work and stuff, so he didn't really do a full university program, but but that's the type of person he is, you know, like he loves to study and learn new things. And
he was very successful with my uncle running a business. But in my mind, my father's accomplishments never really involved his profession. You know, he was a businessman, but you would never have guessed that he was in business. It wasn't something that I think he felt really defined him. What defined him was the things that he really loved. He loved the theater, and he was an actor in the theater here in the Bay Area in the 50s. He's a great cook, a fantastic father, and I think those are things that, you know, like the theater, like the cooking, and like parenting, it's stuff that you can't necessarily point to a concrete thing. I'm a scientist. I have 30 papers that I've published in science. That's an accomplishment that I can point to. But in my father's case, it's far more of an aura and of a performance and of a contribution to his family. First his siblings when he was younger, and then to us. And I think for me those accomplishments are probably more impressive than anything that I can point to in my own life, because he did them under very challenging circumstances.
I was going to say the family, the friends, and I have two wonderful children, and that means a lot to me. Plus the grandchildren, of course.
He was part of the Interplayers, which was founded by Joyce Wilson. She directed plays, and it was a very big group and very, very talented group. But Leo, I think, was the top one. He was the best actor.
I was in a theater group in San Francisco, so that was like a hobby somehow. I had joined this French group, and on a regular basis, we would give a play. And I did that about 10 or 11 years in French.
He clearly loved the theater. He loved to sing. When I was a kid, we would go to the Café Trieste in North Beach every Saturday morning. When I was really little, we lived in North Beach, so we just walked down the hill and would go to the Trieste on Saturday mornings. Later, when we moved to Palo Alto, we would come back to the city every Saturday for his performances, singing with Papa Gianni, the owner of the Trieste.
We had played English plays, and then in the later years, all French. At Villa Montalvo in Saratoga.
When I was in college, he joined a theater group, a French theater group, through the French Club in the South Bay, and did some performances. They had every year they put on a play, a French play. So the year, I think I was a freshman in college, and he asked me to audition, and I got a part, and so we were in the play together, which was really funny.
They had to go to rehearsal together. My sister was a teenager, so she was a little bit, you know, half into it. She wanted to do it, but it was kind of hard doing it with Dad because, you know, he was just being Dad and she was being a teenager. And
it was Le Malade Imaginaire, and I was the whatever, the girl, and he was the uncle. But that was really fun. Like, we got to do like costumes and makeup and rehearsals.
So opening night, the performance started. And at one point in the play, my sister was playing my father's niece in the play. So she was the daughter of the Malade Imaginaire, and he was the brother or something. And at one point, he was supposed to say, ma nièce. And instead he said, ma fille. He said, my daughter, because he was looking at his daughter, and everybody knew the relationship in the theater. So we all laughed, but you know, he got a laugh in a comedy for messing up his line in the cutest way possible. And I always thought that was a really sweet moment for us as a family, because we got to tease him relentlessly about that afterwards.
When I came here, the first 5 years I worked for my uncle. And then I started my own business.
He had the presence of mind to see the value of a company called the Roll Screen Company, which I believe his uncle knew about. And Leon bought the rights to be their representative in San Francisco. They carried a brand called Pella Windows and Doors. And Leon really basically founded that company later with his brother, my husband. But initially, Leon had it all. And when he worked with Pella, he did all the figures and he was essential to the success of the company.
Oh, and they built it from the ground up, and it was kind of a big affair. It was like a warehouse and sales team and distribution.
It doesn't seem like a lot today, but when we started, there were the two of us. And a few years later, 6 or 7 years later, there were 70 people working there. Even then, business was not all that great. It took a while to build. But eventually, when Carter was president and they had the oil embargo, all of a sudden people discovered that wood windows, that was it, Wood windows would save you a lot of energy if you put them in houses and all that. That's when we started. Suddenly people asked us for the windows and we sold them. And the window really exploded. It became a big business.
He's been a world traveler with his friend Cuthbert Chisholm. Yeah, Cuthbert. I never knew what happened to him because he was a little older than I, maybe 7, 8 years older. And he was a tour director. And what happens with tours is that for every 15 tourists that you have, you're allowed one guide. And the tours were with 30 people. So there was Cuthbert, and then I was his assistant. Those were long tours. The title on one of my tours was Around the World in 80 Days. 80 days is a hell of a long time. When you have to live out of a suitcase and then have 30 elderly tourists in tow. And I would have kind of this interesting thing to look back to on where I went, like the temples at Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And that was great to be there. Or in Thailand, Japan. And when I went to Japan, that's when I decided I have to learn to speak Japanese. So I took these courses for a long time. He could pick up any language. I really knows how many languages he speaks. Certainly German, Flemish, French, English, Japanese, and Farsi.
Languages were always important in my life.
He spoke 7 languages when we were born, and then he decided to learn Japanese. And so his hobby became like learning the characters, and sometime, I think we were really young, babies, when he entered a Japanese speech contest in Japantown in San Francisco, and he was competing against native speakers. And then when we were little, we read Three Little Pigs in Japanese.
Oh my God.
And we couldn't understand him, but he wanted to practice. And so, but we just loved that you start at the back of the book, and the characters go this way. So we would just kind of space out while he read the Three Little Pigs, yeah.
Ichinichi Ishokenmei. It says, it's a grand effort when I speak it. I try my best to speak Japanese.
Because of his gift for language, he can connect with people from all over the world in ways that are really surprising. I mean, he loves, even now when he's on the Muni bus in San Francisco, if he hears people speaking Japanese, he'll turn to them and speak to them in Japanese or in Russian or in Persian. And, it really surprises people when they see this old man just pop out in their native language, speaking it properly. Maybe not elaborately, but he can certainly speak it correctly.
To this day, Italian has a great role in my life because I talk to myself in Italian whenever I have a chance. If I'm on the bus, I kind of mumble. And it's in Italian. Azubichoku miu, zinaran spinie papa, es miu signoriku, magari senza giacca.
And so I think that gives him kind of a unique outlook and it's one that certainly my sister and I have absorbed and we're trying to pass on to our kids, a kind of open-mindedness and understanding about other people, other cultures. The curiosity that he has been infectious, I think, to all of us. So I think that's certainly something that makes him a unique personality.
When our children were born, of course, we had to decide. We had to make sure that they would speak English. So the deal was, if their friends came to the house, we'd have to speak English. Because we never wanted to embarrass them by being different, speaking French in front of their friends. We never did. And somehow that worked out.
In my family, especially on my dad's side, the men are cooks. And I think my grandfather was a very good cook, and he taught he taught his sons to cook. And my Uncle Andre was an incredible cook, and my dad was an incredible cook, and some of my cousins are very passionate about cooking. My brother's very passionate about cooking.
Somebody once asked me, when you lived in Italy, what did you eat? Spaghetti. Yes. But besides spaghetti, what did you eat? Spaghetti. Besides spaghetti, we ate spaghetti.
Very good cook. Of course, his wife is a very good cook, too.
And my mom would cook the regular meals. She would kind of, get us fed every day, good meals. But my dad was the kind of person who would, kick us all out of the kitchen and close the doors, and he would make his stew. On the weekends, he'd make a lasagna or a feijoada, which is like a Brazilian beef tongue stew. He had his few recipes that he was really into, yeah.
He always bought for our big Thanksgiving dinners in Sausalito huge dish of mashed potatoes, but special mashed. I've never tasted mashed potatoes like that. It was redolent with butter, and he would heat it up when he came. He also made wonderful lasagna for his son Fabrice when Fabrice was at UC Davis. And I don't know how many times he brought huge bowls of lasagna up, and Fabrice could feed all his friends.
During exam week, during finals, my freshman year, I think I was probably complaining about the dorm food or something. And so my dad baked a lasagna at home in San Francisco and drove it up to Davis for my roommates and I for finals week, which was just a godsend, because you're a starving 19-year-old kid and you're trying to get through this first year of college, and to have real food from home is really great. So he drove it up, dropped it off, and left. He didn't want to distract us. He didn't want to, make a big scene. Just slipped it in the door, said good luck, and left again. And my roommates were so grateful, and as was I.
Fabrice was always so eager when his father came to visit because he had such wonderful stories. He was such good company, and all his friends loved him too. So and they gave a lot of parties. Fabrice loved to cook as his father did, and they loved parties, and we joined in some of them when we were there. But when Leon came, all his friends were just so eager to talk to him. They wanted to know what was going on in the world, what the politics were, what was the big picture, what his ideas were for the future. And speaking of the future, in August, I asked Leon who was going to win the election. And he said, Trump. And I believed him. And I don't know how he knew, but he seemed to know. So I was very impressed with that. He's certainly got an amazing mind.
Actually, my dad was funny, I think, when we were young adults, or he told me, and I wouldn't be surprised if he told my brother the same message, but his company was involved in selling windows and doors, but he was like, don't ever get into sales. Like, whatever you do, don't sell things.
Wonderful friend. And certainly, and I don't have admiration for him, but I love him. He's just a wonderful guy. I'm glad he's in my life.
I try to remember that when my kids ask me to do things that I don't particularly want to do, but I know they really will enjoy. I tell myself, well, he did it for me, so I should do it for them.
The best brother, the best.
How do you like living with your grandchildren, Papa?
Love it.
You love it? Yeah? Good. Oh, there's Yosef.
It's not too crazy here,